So here we are with the Lincoln Mark III. Let's take it for a drive. Great looking car in this maroon color. Well, here we are in the Mark III, air conditioning on. This car has great air conditioning in spite of it just having the 2-piston York compressor. I've never had an instance where I felt like I couldn't cool the cabin. And first impression is versus the Mark IV. This car, everything just feels like it's higher quality. The materials, yes, this is faux wood grain in 69. They actually did go to real wood grain in 70 and in 71. But it feels like such a high quality car. I mean, all the A-pillar, this, all of this is padded very thickly and richly. And it just goes down the road so smooth. The Mark IV is smooth, maybe even a tad smoother than this, but if I had to pick between the two vehicles, I'd pick this all day long. The quality is just beyond reproach. Probably the best domestic vehicle of, let's say, the post-1960 era from a quality standpoint. Over this road, which has all the expansion joints, you just don't feel anything. He's had an interesting philosophy with respect to the chassis in that they have no mounting points on the frame to the body in between the cowl and the rear package shelf. So as you go over these expansion joints, you really don't feel anything. You hear maybe a little bit, but especially compared to the 69 Eldorado, this Mark III, if somebody test drove both back to back, it would be no comparison. The Eldorado over this road surface, you'd hear a lot more of these expansion joints and you'd feel them with a 3/4 length frame, as well as the single leaf rear suspension. This is full coils all the way around, full perimeter frame. My 67 Riviera also does quite well on this with the X frame and rear wheel drive coil suspension, being a platform made to the Eldorado Tornado, but it is not as good as this. This car is, hard to beat from a ride quality perspective. Absolutely silent and quiet. I know a lot of people love muscle cars, but this with a premium fuel 460, really gets up and goes. I'm not going to do it right now because I just filled up on my way back and I don't have the lead substitute in, and I need to get some racing gas, otherwise it'll spark knock if I really get my foot into it. And the other impression is the steering is very slow compared to GM's of the era and Chrysler's. Although in this Mark III, it isn't quite as offensive for some reason. I will say too that the 460, this premium fuel 460, and the premium fuel 429s and 460s do seem to run a bit smoother than the regular fuels. I think that these were balanced and blueprinted, and I don't think that that was fully the case for the regular fuel 460s. They took some cost out. And it's not that the ladders are not smooth. They are smooth. It's just not like this. This is extremely, extremely smooth. such a great ride. It's amazing, for so long these cars were worth pretty much nothing. Nobody appreciated them. Now they're finally starting to get a little bit of a following with the collectors. But if you can still get one for a good price, you won't be disappointed. I will say they are complicated cars. Lots of vacuum-based accessories. This has the automatic climate control. If you need it rebuilt, Lincoln Land can do that. The control box rebuilt. You do have the vacuum door locks. It's actually vacuum and electrically operated. So lots of complicated stuff in here. But absolutely worth it. If you want to turn the cruise control on, you pull this forward, and this little jewel light illuminates. I hope you can really see it. Then you push the button at the end of the turn signal stalk, and there we have it. We're cruising. And then you can either push this little thing forward to turn it off, or step on the brake. From a ride perspective, this and the Thunderbirds of this era are, I think, the best American cars from a ride perspective. If you haven't driven one and you think your 60s, 70s era domestic classic is smooth, I highly encourage you to drive one. And people will say, well, what about the Citroën DS and things like that? Yes, those are very smooth with the hydrodynamic suspension. I really don't think that they're all that much better than this car, to be honest. In spite of its coil springs, solid axle rear. You gotta remember that DS has that super buzzy 4-cylinder engine. And yeah, well, the ride might be nice. That engine just kind of ruins the experience for me. And it's underpowered. This is the antithesis of that. Tons of power, tons of torque, extreme levels of smoothness from the powertrain. The only thing that I would ding the powertrain on is the Ford C6 and the C4 and the FMX never shifted as smooth as the GM Hydramatics or Chrysler Torque Flights. They're pretty firm shifting cars, so much so that when I first got this car, this was my first classic Ford, I thought the transmission was about to go out because it was shifting what I felt to be pretty harshly. Well, now after having owned, I don't know, 25 of these cars, maybe more, they all shift the same way. It's just different. Some people like it, some people don't. I wouldn't call it offensive, but in this kind of car, I would prefer it to be a bit smoother. In any case, hope you enjoyed this little drive in the Mark III. So luxurious, so comfortable, so cold on the air conditioning. I've got it on the low setting, and it's about 85 degrees outside, and I am freezing. I have the temperature at 65, so I'll move that over a little bit. Thanks again for watching. Take care. All right, so that was a brief drive in the 69 Mark III. Let's now turn to the 72 Mark IV. Here it is. This car has only 15,000 miles on it. Got it about 4 years ago. It does have the grille guard in the front, but it is the only year with the small bumpers. It's also a pretty dramatic styling departure from the Mark III, with more rounded forms and less angular surfacing. But unfortunately, by the time the Mark IV came around, the quality just wasn't quite the same as it was on the Mark III. And let's go experience a little bit more of that as we go on a drive now. All right, so here we are out for a drive in the Mark IV. Not a very nice day, but good enough. First impression of driving this car is it's very, very smooth. I would say the overall suspension setup is softer than the Mark III, if you can believe that. Certainly is taking these bumps very well, very little impact harshness that makes its way to the cabin. But it is, as Mark would say, a bit of a busy ride in that it it does kind of pitch and yaw a little bit, and this car has new shocks. This is just how they drive. I've driven a number of these Mark IVs, and busy, not by the standards of, if you drive this car and you compare it to something on the road today, you're not going to think that. But if you compare it to something like my 59 Parisienne or Mark's 59 Chevrolet, and just how level the ride is on those cars, you're going to find that this one has more of a waterbed-like feel to it in terms of how the suspension soaks up the bumps and the residual impact afterward. Other thing I would say is this car, sitting behind the wheel, you definitely can tell it's not the Mark III. I mean, the dash isn't bad, but it's got these two different faux wood grains that don't really look anywhere near as rich as what was on the Mark III. And you have hard plastic A-pillars. The Mark III has padded A-pillars. Get this nice fuzzy headliner here. Interesting turn signals too. That's the bright light indicator in the middle, and then the left and the right turn signal, so you can see what it looks like. No full complement of gauges, just the idiot lights, including the SureTrack light over here for the braking system. This does have rear wheel ABS brakes. But in spite of it not being the Mark III in terms of overall materials, it's still a pleasant car. I mean, this is not a great road, and you can hear there's no impact harshness as I go over these bumps. Extremely smooth. The engine also isn't nearly as responsive as the Mark III. This 460 isn't bad in this car, but it's not the premium fuel 460 of a few years earlier. This was making in the low 200 horsepowers. The premium fuel 460 was making 365 gross horsepower, probably somewhere in the 250, 260 net horsepower range. And this car is heavier than the Mark III as well, weighing in at like 4,800 pounds. So not great when you increase the weight and you reduce the horsepower, but that is what it is. It's still, stoplight to stoplight, still gets up and goes just fine. I don't feel like there's a lack of power or anything. Passing power, though, isn't quite the same. I do think the road noise and isolation, though, is a bit better inside the cabin. The one thing that really lets it down in terms of noise is I have the HVAC system on right now, and the blower on these is interior to the passenger compartment. So when you have the air conditioning on full recirculation or the fan is on a higher speed, unfortunately it's noisier than on the Mark III and on other vehicles of the era. And I think that's just the Torino source of the componentry. So that's one unfortunate thing. I think the other thing which is a bit noisier is the wiper motor activation. You get in some of these Fords, I don't know if they reverse the current and that's how they do back and forth, but you hear some of the, I'll call it the lash in the gear train as it changes direction and pivots back the other way. And they're all kind of like that except for the Mark III, which is completely silent in operation. So something you're not going to pick up on in a normal review. But Fords, for whatever reason during this era, the wipers were noisier, I find, than the GMs of the era and even the Chryslers. But the interior cabin noise in this car is so low. I'm going 65 miles an hour. Very modern day car-like here, coupled with a much more supple suspension over concrete. I'm going over concrete right now, which modern cars with their tires and their unibody you'd notice a discernible difference in noise going from asphalt to concrete. You don't notice anything in this car. It's the exact same noise level. And you can see I'm keeping up with traffic just fine. No issues at all. Car cruises very pleasantly. I'm going about 72, 73 miles an hour right now. No issues. This car does have the rim blow horn steering wheel. You pinch the wheel and it honks. It's also the non-cruise control wheel. Cruise control is just a 2-spoke wheel with controls on either end to set the cruise and turn it on and off. So overall, how would I describe this versus the Mark III and other contemporary cars? I think versus the Cadillac Eldorado, the ride on this car is much better. The Cadillac ride back then was pretty terrible. And it wasn't so much the ride itself as it was the interior components would just shake and rattle as you went over bumps. They just weren't well put together. This car, as you've probably heard, there's no bump, there's no rattles, no anything in the interior. And it's very quiet and peaceful in here. Could do a long road trip all day long. Seats are quite comfortable. The only thing that is not great is this gun-slit greenhouse with not much distance from the top of the roof to the IP. Feels a little cramped in here. But again, not horrible, just not what people I think were used to from the time. That said, Ford sold almost 50,000 of these in 1972, so it obviously didn't bother most people, in spite of this being the most expensive car in Lincoln's lineup. Well more expensive, 15% more expensive at base price than the Continental. So this was supposed to be the exclusive car. The Continental was not. And at the end of the day, the Continental Coupe sold 10,000 units. This sold 50,000 units. So overall, material quality, tangibly not the Mark III. Ride quality in this car, I'd say it's pretty good. Softer than the Mark III. Isolation, maybe slightly better. Power, not as good as the Mark III. Brakes, about the same. Steering, this car's maybe marginally better, about the same as the Mark III. Seat comfort, I think this one's got more comfortable seats actually than the Mark III does. So overall, it really comes down to the build quality. That's where the Mark III just shines with its overall fit and finish and materials used. Other than that, I mean, this car is very pleasant. And compared to the Cadillac Eldorado of the day, I would say this Mark IV compared favorably in material quality, even though Ford had gone down in material quality, GM had gone down even further on that 71 to 78 Eldorado versus the previous generation. And GM really started cutting costs, I would say, with the 68 model year. Hope you enjoyed that ride. We're cruising along at 75. Perfectly quiet. Thanks for watching. Goofy thing about the Mark IV, 72 only, they have this power door lock where you have to push up or down on the plunger and it mirrors the action on the opposing side. So if I push down, you can see the door locks. The problem is that it's hard, as you can imagine, if you're somebody who likes to lock the door or unlock the door once you're in the car, you got to reach backward to activate it. And I think that's why they got rid of that setup after just 1 year. The Mark IV had the control on the door panel here, which was much, much better. But again, you can cruise along all day in this car, going 80, 85 miles an hour. You're just going to burn a lot of gas. So I usually keep it to 70 or 75. I'm in no hurry. And this car gets about 14, 15 miles per gallon at 70 miles an hour. If I start going 80, 85, it drops to 11 to 12. Just, you're pushing a lot of air with this front end. So, no sense in hurrying. Take your time. Whatever event you're headed to starts when you arrive, when you're driving a Mark III or IV. Thanks for watching this video comparison of the 1969 Mark III and 72 Mark IV and Ride and Drive. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the super thanks button. I'll be especially thankful for that. And also like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care.